Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Condos, Architects, and Tarion's New Home Warranty. I'm Felix, the webinar coordinator from the Continuing Education Department at the OAA, and I'm happy to facilitate today's session. We will begin today's webinar by acknowledging the land on which we are meeting and calling in from today. For millennia, the place we call Ontario has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples and nations who have been stewards of the land and are deeply connected to its rich cultural and natural landscape. We would like to invite you in a moment of reflection to acknowledge our shared responsibility to address past and present injustices and to provide knowledge and worldviews to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. Before we commence, I would like to share some important information to ensure an effective and professional webinar experience. Please be informed that this session is being recorded for quality and educational purposes. In order to maintain a stable internet connection, we have muted all participant microphones and disabled video feeds. We highly encourage engagement through our Q&A window. Feel free to submit any questions you may have for our speakers. These will be addressed in the designated question and answer period at the end of the presentation. For those seeking education learning hours, please note that attendance is crucial. A minimum of 80% attendance is required for these hours to be accredited to your OAA transcript. Please allow up to a few weeks for the processing and reporting of these hours. And lastly, please note that the presenters do not provide insurance, legal, or practice advice, and the OAA does not bear responsibility for errors or omissions in discussions during the webinar. For accessibility, we provide automated closed captioning service available in multiple languages to accommodate the needs for our diverse audience. But now, I'm excited to introduce you to our speakers for today's session. Please welcome Ryan Haley, Sandro Nevicato, and Andrew Donacci. Thanks for your attention. Let us now proceed with the session, and I'm passing it over to our speakers.
Perfect. Thank you, Felix. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. We're happy to be here to speak to you folks, and thank you to the Ontario Association of Architects for inviting us. So obviously, we're here today to talk about Tarion, the new home warranty program, what we do at Tarion, how that impacts different projects such as condos, and how it impacts yourselves as architects. So we'll go through off the top. We'll introduce, I'll provide an introduction of our speakers. We're going to go through our role in the new home warranty process. We're going to speak specifically to Registrar Bulletin 19, or colloquially as B19. That has a specific process for condo development, the role of a field review consultant. We're going to speak a little bit to residential condo conversion projects, as well as post-construction performance audit reporting, and provided some additional links to additional resources in the presentation. And then we'll end today's session with a Q&A. So in terms of today's presenters, obviously, we've got Ryan Haley, our Director of Common Elements from Warranty Services on the line, Sandro Nevicato, Technical Manager, Field Review and Common Elements, also in our Warranty Services Department, and then myself, Andrew Donachie, Manager in Media and Stakeholder Relations at Tarion. Now, to start off, we're just going to do a quick little poll question to see what your familiarity is with Tarion. So we'll pause while everyone takes a minute to provide their response.
Perfect, Andrew. Thank you very much. And the first poll question has been launched and is still open. And it looks like the majority of the participants have now answered. So let's end the poll and share the results.
Perfect. So looking at that, the majority of people are at least somewhat familiar with Tarion, so that's good news. But obviously, there's a significant chunk that are not familiar with what we do in our role here in the province of Ontario. So that's good news that there's a few folks online that'll learn a lot today. Excellent. So going forward into actually what it is that we do. Again, to give you a bit of background, so Tarion as an organization was established in 1976 as a not-for-profit consumer protection organization created specifically by the Ontario government to administer the province's new home warranty program. So for those of you that may not be aware, by law under the Ontario New Home Warranties Plan Act, or what we refer to as ONWIPA, all new homes built in Ontario are provided with a warranty by the builder. So our role is to ensure that the buyers of newly built homes here in Ontario receive the coverage that they are entitled to under that builder's warranty. So we backstop the builder's warranty. An important decision to make. Some people sometimes refer to Tarion as an insurance provider. That's not really what we do. We're the backstop for the builder's warranty. And so the builder provides the warranty. Our job is to step in if the builder doesn't fulfill their warranty obligations. So part of our mandate is also to create awareness about warranty coverage for our stakeholders, which is one of the reasons why we're here today, providing that information to you folks. We also can, so again, in terms of our administration of the warranty claims process and backstopping builders' warranties, we are also responsible for authorizing construction and sale plans for licensed builders and vendors. We do that through a process called qualification for enrollment, as well as once the builder gets to the stage where they're ready to build, the builder then enrolls the home in our program. Now, in terms of ourselves versus our sort of similar organization, the Home Construction Regulatory Authority, effective as of February 1st of 2021, the Home Construction Regulatory Authority, or HCRA, assumed a role Tarion previously had of licensing new home builders and vendors. So this means that the HCRA is responsible for granting new licenses and renewing existing licenses for builders. And really anyone that plans to build or sell a new home in Ontario has to be licensed by the HCRA. So in addition to licensing, the HCRA is also responsible for investigating honesty and integrity complaints made against vendors and builders for any conduct, which can include investigations or prosecuting illegal building practices. The HCRA also now manages and maintains the Ontario Builder Directory, which is an online resource that homeowners, the general public, yourselves could go to look up a builder's record and some of the information related to their enrollments and the homes under warranty. Now, this was previously located on Tarion's website, but is now can be found on the HCRA's website. In terms of, I'm going to pass it off to Ryan in a sec, but in terms of how you think about ourselves versus Tarion, a really simple explanation is that the HCRA deals with the builder and Tarion deals with the bricks and mortar component. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ryan to speak to warranty coverage.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to speak a little bit about warranty coverage. And we say warranty, but the warranty is actually made up of several warranties and protections that start before a homeowner moves in and last for about, last for 7 years from the date of occupancy. There's also warranty coverage for common elements of a condominium corporation, and those are the shared spaces in and around the condominium building that are owned collectively by all owners of the building. This is typically hallways, lobbies, garages, other amenities. The common elements have their own warranty coverage up to a cap of $3.5 million for agreements of purchase and sale that were signed on or after February 1st, 2021. So let's start with the first year of warranty, which provides the most comprehensive coverage. During the first year, a condominium corporation or an owner is protected against defects in work and materials. And this is a very generalized term. We use numerous reference documents to understand what a defect in workmanship and material is. Some of these documents include the construction performance guidelines. We have both a freehold version, which applies to homes and units of condominiums, and we have a CE version of the CPG, which is for the common elements. We also reference municipal bylaws and standards, along with generally accepted industry and accepted construction practices. If a standard is being used to substantiate the defect, the standard should be provided to the vendor and builder to make sure that the claim is as clear as possible. Damages occurring from violations of the Ontario Building Code are also covered under the first year of warranty. Something else that's covered is unauthorized substitutions, and this is typically where a purchaser paid for something and they didn't get what they paid for. This is an element that must be explicitly promised and stated to the purchasers in their agreement of purchase and sale. So we always refer back to kind of what they bargained for, what they purchased, and look at how that's different than what they actually received. The difference between as-built drawings and what was actually built does not necessarily constitute an unauthorized substitution, as the drawings don't often form part of the agreement of purchase and sale. Fit for habitation is another coverage in the first year. So this is really as defined by the Ontario Building Code. If there's issues with habitability, or if there's code violations, that can be covered certainly in the first year. And the first year warranty also ensures both the unit and the building is fit for habitation and free of major structural defects. That MSD warranty runs the entire length of the warranty for 7 years, and we'll talk a little bit more about MSDs coming up. So after the first year of warranty, the remaining warranty starts to narrow a little bit, and it protects against health and safety violations of the Ontario Building Code. So in the first year, where it could be any code violation, whether or not it was related to health and safety, would be covered in the first year. Now in the second year, it really narrows and focuses on health and safety aspects. And a lot of times we reference the objectives and function statements in the code to help us understand what parts of the code actually relate to health and safety. So that's something that we do. It also covers against defects in the distribution services. So this is things like electrical, plumbing, heating, all wiring, conduits, pipes, junctions, switches, etc. All of the things that kind of help a system deliver what it's designed to deliver. Work and materials that cause water penetration is also covered through the basement, foundation, and building envelope. This is a pretty key one that we deal with on the common element side. A large number of our claims have to do with water ingress through the building envelope. And as well, the home's cladding, whatever it is, or the building's cladding is covered for 2 years from displacement, deterioration, or detachment. So then we get into MSDs, and this is in year 7 and beyond, year 3 to 7. Examples of major structural defects can include foundation cracks that may indicate significant movement or a structural issue. It's important to note that elevators are excluded from this coverage, and we have really 3 tests that we apply in looking to determine whether or not a major structural defect is present. So there's a failure test, and this is really any defect in work materials that results in a failure of a load-bearing part of the home's structure or significantly affects its load-bearing function. The second test that we apply is the function test. So that's defects in work materials that adversely and materially affect the load-bearing function of a structural component, essentially, a shorter lifespan. And then the use test. So this is any defect in materials or work that significantly affects a significant portion of the use of the home. And that can be kind of a vague statement, figuring out how much is a significant portion, especially when we talk about condominiums, if we have a major structural defect that's affecting the use of a condominium. So a lot of these are assessed on a case-by-case basis, and we do have some additional guidelines and resource documents on our website to help kind of understand how we look at that criteria and how we apply that for an MSD. Major structural defects, so I think I got a couple other points on the last slide there. I just wanted to note that major structural defects can be something other than a structural defect. There are situations, and this really comes back to the use test. There are situations where mold and radon can be considered an MSD if the effects of that mold and radon is creating a situation where the home or a portion of the home is not able to be used. Okay, we could jump to the next slide there, Andrew or Megan. So exclusions. It's important to note that not everything is covered under the statutory warranty, and here are a few of the exclusions that apply. So defect in materials, design, and work supplied by the owner. So if an owner or if a condo corporation is making changes, clearly the vendor is not responsible for those changes and any defects that come as a result. Normal wear and tear. that's not something the builder is responsible for. Normal shrinkage of materials caused by just drying after construction. That's a normal thing that we expect. Nail pops, hairline cracks, we see a lot of that, and generally that's just cosmetic, and I mean, unless it's a result of an installation defect, but then it's not in the normal shrinkage category. Damage resulting from improper maintenance is also something that's important. So it's really important for condominium corporations in particular to maintain their systems and keep active logs of their systems to make sure that in the event of an issue down the road, they can show that they actually did, properly maintain their building. Damage from floods, acts of gods, wars, riots, vandalisms, that's understandable. And any work or changes done by any party other than the builder, renovations, for example, by the owner or the condo corporation. So I just wanted to get into, now we're talking about common elements a little bit more specifically, and internally we have this classification system of types, and this doesn't come from the code, although these types rely on referencing the parts of the building code that are used and designed for. So a type A condominium is a project that has only Part 9 building code requirements and is a lot line condo. So examples of this is listed here on the screen. Typically common elements include the roadways, curbs, sidewalks, but exclude the home and the unit dwelling. So like a common element condo, for example. Type B condominiums, these have, again, only Part 9 building code requirements, but it's not a lot line condo. So the common elements are, the backside of drywall, and then the building envelope itself is typically a common element owned by the condo corporation. When we get into Type C condominiums, this has a combination of both Part 9 and Part 3 Ontario building code requirements. Typically, we're getting into, some underground parking, and some other components that would introduce Part 3 requirements. And then Type D condominiums are exclusively Part 3. And these classifications are more internally, but it's for the application of B19. Type C and Type D condos require B19 reporting, and Sandro is going to talk in a little bit more depth about B19 and what that is exactly. We don't, while there is warranty for Type A and B condos, there is not B19 requirements for reporting. And then condominiums without warranty coverage. So there are a couple different situations where the warranty does not apply. One of those situations is common element condominiums, also known as parcel of tied lands or POTLs. So these are situations where the condo corporation with the common elements, there really isn't any unit or building assigned to those common elements. So it's typically things that are more associated with that Type A condo, which is the roads, landscaping, and things like that. So because there isn't common elements that are make up the part of the building itself, there isn't any warranty for common elements in the parcel of tied land. The other exclusion is vacant land. So a vacant land condo is the only type of condo that can be registered before construction of an actual unit on the land takes place. And there isn't any warranty coverage for vacant land condos as well. So of course, there's, those are the standard exclusions to coverage. There are some unique situations that require us to really, look at a particular project and figure out how the warranty applies. So, for example, vendor-owned suites as personal residences. So if a developer retains a unit that they purchased, that they built and doesn't sell it, and they retain it for themselves, it doesn't have warranty coverage. So that's important to know. Vendor-owned suites as rental units, rental units. So once again, if a developer is building a condo, keeping suites back to then own them and rent them out, those also don't have coverage. Commercial or retail spaces, we see a lot of integration with condos where you've got, the lower couple floors have commercial aspects. The commercial spaces and retail spaces aren't necessarily covered under warranty because they're not a unit or a home. But where those spaces meet up against the common elements that do have coverage is often a unique assessment to look at. So if you have a restaurant or a commercial space on the main floor, sometimes that building envelope that encloses it is a common element, although not always. So it's really important to understand the surveys, reviewing the survey documents and understanding where that space starts and stops. Guest suites owned by the corporation. These are units. These are just something that doesn't necessarily get sold, but there would be a warranty for that. Where 2 or 3 towers occupy one parking garage footprint, each tower is bound by the boundaries provided in the description and declaration. So we're seeing kind of more and more unique and creative applications of sites where we've got 3 or more buildings sitting on one underground parking podium. So then there's a real assessment to understand who actually owns what pieces. Is this one condo corporation that owns all of it and it's phased? Or is this a situation where, one corporation owns the entire underground parking and then the other 2 buildings are sitting on that parking structure and they have a shared facility agreement to be able to use it and to access it and things like that. So there's a lot of different things that we have to consider. Separate recreational facilities. So this is kind of talking about the same thing where you've got this multi-ownership shared structure. Sometimes it extends to, other facilities and amenities. And this is typically illustrated in a shared facility agreement. And then I mentioned phase projects a little bit as well. So that creates a unique piece. Phase projects are when there's a condominium that's built and registered, and then it's added to in an additional phase. So another adjacent condominium is built, and then instead of it being a separate condominium corporation and registered independently, it's registered as part of the original condominium corporation that was registered. So there's an amendment to the registration. So it's warrantable. It has a different warranty start date than the the initial condo corporation for the first phase. And we can see projects with, 4, 5, 6, really an unlimited number of phases, but it creates some additional work just because we have to figure out, what are the individual timelines for each of those different phases. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Sandro, and Sandro is going to walk you through the Registrar Bulletin 19 process.
Thanks, Ryan. So Registrar Bulletin 19, we refer often to as B19. You often hear us talk amongst consultants, or you hear our field review consultants out there talk, and they're always referring to B19. So we generally use B19 in our conversations with this product. It first came into effect in 1995 for high-rise condominium projects and was revised in 2010 to include conflict of interest, acoustical, and water testing, along with reporting of multiple towers. In January 2015, it was revised again to include the mid-rise wood frame, and it was included as a type C or D condo. The latest revisions you can see here on the screen. Back in February 2021, the revision was to address this for the separate licensing of builders and the Tarion process, where the licensing of builders is now carried by HCRA, as it was previously noted in the slide with Andrew. With changes to the building code in 2022, Tarion provided supplemental requirements to be added to reviews carried out by field review consultants for B19 process. The changes in November of 2022 allowed the early occupancy of super tall projects. This allows vendor builders to occupy buildings of certain height while still under construction. We currently are working with early adapters of this change to introduce new requirements. The code also changed to allow modular unit construction to be used in condominiums, we work with new vendor builders who are proposing new modular projects like one we have in Kenora right now. And lastly, we have the encapsulated mass timber construction, which permits a 12-story mass timber building. And we have yet to see one of these proposals, but these supplements are not supplements that you'll see. We will provide them to the B19 consultant of a particular project if one of these projects were submitted and proposed to Tarion. So now we have our second poll question, which I'll turn over to Felix.
Thank you very much, Sandro. And just for our members, the poll question is open. So if you take a moment to read and answer it, that would be great. Perfect. And many members have already participated. So let's finish the poll and share the results.
So we're generally equal across the questions. Perfect. So Registrar Bulletin 19. Vendors, through Tarion's terms and conditions imposed on builders when granting an application, we require vendors to retain qualified field review consultants to report on key warranty claim risk areas. So the field review consultants, also we call FRCs for short, which you'll hear me say a number of times, are generally, as stated there, mandatory through the terms and conditions. Our B19 outlines requirements for reports and information that must be provided to Tarion by the FRCs and the vendors of the condominium projects enrolled under the Act. The reality is vendors under the builder agreements with Tarion are required to comply with this bulletin. This is a major component of Tarion's risk prevention strategy for large condominiums, and B19 requirements are intended to assist the vendors in mitigating their warranty claim risk during the design and construction of their new condominium projects. This diagram here shows the working relationships between the parties. So in our previous slide, we're mentioning the terms and conditions of the FRCs. You can see in this diagram where the vendor has the agreements with all the designers that they hire, and obviously the contractors that they use. And then there's a requirement for the field review consultant to be taken on by the terms and conditions that we lay out. And then the reporting from that field review consultant comes to Tarion. And through that VB agreement is where all this reporting comes through for the vendor builder. For projects that include Part 3 requirements, the vendor is required to retain the field review consultant from Tarion's approved list of B19 consultants. So we do have a list of 30 consultants that we use that are approved as FRCs. The FRC is the third-party consultant, obviously, as shown in the diagram, tasked to do this work under the bulletin. Their role is to identify potential risks, as I mentioned earlier, and both to Tarion and to the vendor builder through the process. So this slide here generally gives you the diagram of how our bulletin process works. The red line you see there is the construction start line. Before construction starts, the FRC is selected, and then the FRC provides us with a scope of work. Generally, the scope of work is provided to Tarion 45 days prior to construction. And during that time, you may be getting requirements to sign design certificates, and the FRC will be obtaining those design certificates from all the designers of record on that project and provide them to us. Generally, what happens in this process is that the FRC will send a scope of work, either with design certificates or without. And then generally what we want to see is all the design certificates submitted to us before milestone 2. Once construction starts, the bulletin requires the FRC to provide 60-day reporting. So the first reports that come to us generally give us a snapshot of the progress of construction. And then there forward, every 60 days, they're providing that snapshot, identifying deficiencies, identifying progress. And then through the project, you'll see that there's milestones. And in those milestones, the consultant, the B19 consultant, will provide additional reporting, which is providing us with a more detailed list of deficiencies, a narrative of what is progressing on site. And at each one of these milestones, milestone 1, 2, 3, and 4, will receive those additional reports. Now, at the very end of every project, the FRC is required to send us a final report, a final B19 report. That final B19 report generally will include the design certificates, the milestone reports, clearance letters, reports that are required for closing off projects. Sometimes we'll see water testing reports, window testing reports, balcony guard test reports, anchor documents, suppression certificates. But most importantly, we are looking for the clearance letters. And I'm sure that for those of you who have worked in condominiums, have probably been reached out by our FRCs asking for clearance letters at the end of the project. This final report that's submitted to us generally is submitted to us through a notice of completion document provided to the builder, and then the builder provides us the final report, which in turn at the end is also provided to the condo boards. Now, field review consultants' responsibilities. In one sentence, the very first one there, field review consultants are to provide a layer of quality review during the construction of a type C or D building, ensuring the intent of the construction documents are realized, especially with regard to mitigating the warranty claim risk. This sentence generally tells you in a snapshot what the field review consultants' work entails. They're generally commenting on design. You may have had FRCs approach you asking for your drawings. You may have been approached by suggestions or recommendations that the FRCs have provided. And we ask them to review drawings and comment to minimize risk on buildings prior to construction starts. They're assessing site inspections reports as they relate to identified risk areas. They conduct field reviews to monitor performance and quality of workmanship to identify risk areas. And in addition to the FRCs providing or conducting field reviews, our staff also does. Some of you may have seen our staff on site, but our staff at each milestone that I had mentioned earlier in the previous slide also attend the sites to review the reporting that we receive from the FRCs. Additionally, the FRCs are there to identify warranty risk and ensure that mitigation is early as possible, carried out as early as possible. The other responsibilities FRCs have are identifying significant defects arising from construction, ensuring full resolution by design consultants responsible, verifying and sign off of design consultants. So this whole statement talks about, identifying a deficiency, which generally we will see in the milestone. We do see them on 60-day reports, but generally they are carried through the milestone. They carry those deficiencies through all 4 milestones. If they're not resolved, we will see them on the milestone 4 and also on the final report. The final B19 report carries what's called a field review declaration. In that field review declaration, all the risk areas are covered, and what we're asking the FRCs to do is verify that any deficiencies in those risk areas have been verified and signed off by the appropriate design consultant, and if not, what is the cost to complete that deficiency in the B19 at that time. So FRCs also ensure defects are captured and resolution is through the milestone reporting as identified, as I just said. They create and submit on time a complete and thorough B19 report for the builder, condominium board, and Tarion. And they ensure all standing deficiencies documented in the B19 report are completed and cleared with an improved notice provided to the builder and Tarion. And that last statement, generally what happens is that we ask the FRC to carry out a final review of any deficiencies that are on the field review declaration. So at the end of the day, we need to make sure that whatever deficiencies are identified, the FRC will go out, review those deficiencies, and provide Tarion with a final sign-off of those deficiencies. Design certificates. For those of you who have worked in the condo sector, I'm sure that you've seen these, you've filled them out, you've stroked out many lines, I'm sure, and put some comments on many of these forms. They're required to be filled out by each design consultant listed on the scope of work. It identifies all the applicable risk areas that relate to design documents they prepare and are responsible for. So each designer will initial the risk area that they are responsible for in their design, designates who's responsible for a particular discipline for the design of the building. Each design certificate must be accompanied by proof of professional designation and current professional liability insurance. And I'm sure that many of you have been asked for those documents throughout the process. Typically, we will ask for these at the very front end of the project with a design certificate, but you may find at times that the FRC may be coming to you at the end of the project asking for it again. Generally, what our process is that we require these at the beginning of the project. We make sure that your liability of insurance is up to date at the very beginning, but we're not looking for an updated version at the end of the project. Generally, when we get these at the beginning, they're fine to be inserted into the final B19 document. The design certificates are usually submitted with the scope of work, as I mentioned earlier. The VB must submit each certificate to Tarion at least 30 days prior to commencement of work covered by the portion of that design. At the latest, all design certificates are submitted to Tarion by milestone 2. The vendor builder should assist in collection of these documents. They, as the previous slide indicated, milestone 2, when the structure is up, if there are missing design certificates in our file from our staff, we will generally stop accepting documents. So at that point, if you do have your client who's reaching out to you or an FRC reaching out to you for a design certificate, the purpose at that time is because we didn't receive one. So we generally stop accepting all documents, which triggers the client, your client generally, to go out to his staff and obtain the design certificates that are missing. In B19 final reports, the FRC submits the final reports to the builder and notifies Tarion through a notice of completion. The builder then submits the final report to the elected condo board and to Tarion within 90 days of registration of the declaration description. We are asking this from our FRCs in the 90 days, whether the document is fully completed or not. There are times where we're getting these reports way too late. And so we typically ask our FRCs to submit them. And then from there, we'll have a list of required documents if they're not fully completed. And then we generally talk to the vendor builder to pursue those documents that are required. The final report, as I mentioned earlier, contains a suite of documents as outlined in B19. One of them is a clearance letter required by all design consultants, must have condominium declaration is filed with Land Titles Office. Schedule G of this declaration is to be signed by an architect or engineer, provides a final review declaration, as I mentioned earlier, by the FRC, covering defects and incomplete work at the time of the report. To add to this, sometimes we do have situations where clearance letters are not fully provided to us because a particular designer has deficiencies outstanding. In our case, for Tarion's purposes, we do accept clearance letters with deficiencies. So if you were to submit a clearance letter to your client and identify the defects that are outstanding, and a potential cost would be would be fantastic. But if it's identified, then we can identify those deficiencies in the final B19, and then make sure when the FRC goes back out to site that those are cleared by yourself and by the FRC. If a vendor and a builder exist, this document is extremely useful for the vendor to ensure their builder fully meets their obligations and allows the vendor builders to direct their trades to resolve all outstanding issues. So it's critical at the end of the project that the deficiencies that are outstanding, the builder still has their trades and they can deal with these situations prior to the performance audit coming in. And now we have poll question number 3, and I will be turning this back over to Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Sandro. So this question is, have you been approached by a condo board for documentation after registration of a condo? Just for a little bit more clarity, so documentation, we're really talking about, information or questions about the design or specifications or anything like that. Are you in any communication with a condo corporation after registration?
Brian, thank you very much. And the poll question is still open, but lots of participants have answered. So let's finish and share the results.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So 11% yes, 72% no, and then some unsure. Okay, so yeah, it's something that we question. This next section that I'm going to talk a little bit about is kind of the process for submitting a claim and how a corporation actually works through dealing with issues that are unresolved from the construction phase. With the performance audit, and I'm going to get into all that. But yeah, one thing that we sometimes have wondered is how involved are architects and during this process. So we'll get into it here. If we could jump into the next slide there, submitting a common element warranty claim. So claim submissions come to Tarion in the form of either a statutory warranty form or a performance audit. The majority of claims that the Common Element Group deals with are submitted by way of a performance audit, whether it be the first year or the second year warranty coverage. So the Condominium Act, established in 98, requires that all condominium corporations, board of directors, property managers shall retain an engineer to complete and submit a performance audit to Tarion as a first-year warranty claim. I think more specifically, it says that they're required to submit a performance, or they're required to complete a performance audit, and then that performance audit can form the claim to Tarion. So in practice, what happens is the condominium corporations kind of do what they're required to do under the Condo Act. They get this performance audit that identifies numerous deficiencies with the building, and then that is then sent by the engineer or the condo corporation directly to Tarion, and then that becomes the claim that we work off for the first year. That document typically comes in, it's required under the Condo Act by month 11. So we also want everybody to keep in mind that this is a requirement of the Condo Act. But as long as the claim is submitted to Tarion within the first year, then they're still kind of meeting their statutory requirements. There's a lot of timelines in our acts about when claims have to come in, so it's important that they come in on time, otherwise they're invalid. Another part of this whole process is a performance audit tracking summary. I won't get into too much detail about this because you guys, you folks aren't involved in the day-to-day of the performance audit tracking. But just so you know, so when a claim comes in, basically there's a large spreadsheet that's created with all the items referenced back to the performance audit. It goes up on a database where the vendor builder and the condo corporation have access to it. And they work over the build repair period, which I'll talk about in a moment. And they communicate back and forth on progress, questions, updates, sharing documents, that sort of thing. So that's kind of how they work through it. And then as part of that, sometimes they may reach out to you, which was the question that we were asking about. And it could be the corporation, or it could also be the vendor builder that's reaching out to you for input. Let's jump to the next slide there. So the builder repair period. So there's an 18-month builder repair period that begins on the anniversary of the date of registration. 18 months seems like a long time, but it goes by very, very quickly. So the 18-month builder repair period and request for conciliation includes both the first and second year claims. And a conciliation is basically an inspection where Tarion warranty representatives attend on site and determine if an item's warranted. So how it works is the first year performance audit comes in, then the builder repair period starts at that point, essentially 18 months. And then within that 18 months, we get a second year claim at the anniversary of the second year, and then the builder gets 6 more months to deal with anything new that's reported on that. At the end of that, if the items that were reported are not resolved to the satisfaction of the owner, being the condo corporation, then they request a conciliation, and then that's when we go out and do that inspection. Updates are required every 90 days. So that performance audit tracking that I mentioned in the last slide, we ask for both parties to be kind of actively communicating through the builder repair period and talk to us and talk to each other, more importantly, and we encourage them every 90 days to update that. And then the initial builder repair period ends on the same day. I mentioned that. And then if the corporation requests a conciliation, the vendor builder gets an additional 90 days prior to the conciliation to kind of wrap up any last minute things that were identified as outstanding. If that's not done, conciliation takes place. We write an assessment and a report goes out. And then if there's anything that's warranted, the vendor builder gets an additional post-conciliation repair period of 90 days. I think we can maybe jump to the next slide. So this is just a little bit of a visual representation of what I talked about. So I think I got some arrows here. So okay, so this first one, the condo corporation submits the audits. This is the date of registration of the condo corporation, and then that's the 18 months. That moves along, and then if that's not resolved, including the second year builder, the second year performance audit, they can request a conciliation. They've got 60 days to do that. And then once they request conciliation, they're down here in the 90-day pre-conciliation builder repair period, goes to conciliation over here, and then a post-builder conciliation if there's anything that's warranted. If there's still items that are warranted after that, Tarion resolves any outstanding items directly with the condo corporation or the owner. This same kind of principle applies to the unit side, although the timelines are much shorter on the unit side. So I should preface all this by saying that this is all for the common elements. Okay, so the next, we've got another poll here, and this question is, are you aware that condo conversion projects are covered by warranty?
Thanks again, Ryan, for poll question number 4. And again, let's end the poll as most have already responded. And here are the results.
Okay, so 33% yes, 67% no. That's I guess a little concerning because they are covered by warranty. So this is the reason that we're doing these sorts of trainings, so that we can educate on these processes. This is a relatively new process and warranty for that matter. So it's understandable that there's kind of still some growing pains in the industry and maybe some lack of information generally. So we're trying to get that message out. So if we could jump to the next slide, I'd like to talk about residential condominium conversion projects a little bit. Okay, so I mentioned this was newer. So as of January 1st, 2018, residential condominium conversion projects qualify for warranty coverage. Essentially, there was some concerns at the the ministry level with these products that were being converted and sold, and there was some issues that the purchasers were experiencing after the fact, and it was to the extent that the ministry said to Tarion, this is something that we want warranty coverage for, and so we developed a process to kind of vet one of these projects, understand the risks, and develop this RCCP, residential condo conversion project process. So how this works, the warranty applies to projects where the first agreement of purchase and sale is signed on or after January 1st, 2018. A residential condominium conversion project is when an existing non-residential building, like a warehouse, a church, can be other things that touch on residential, like dormitories or hotels, that sort of thing. Could even be a single family home. So when this is converted into a condominium, this warranty takes effect. So in this type of project, pre-existing elements of the building, such as the foundation, framing, could be windows, could be mechanical, roof, really whatever's being retained, they're incorporated into a new design and the construction of the building. Buildings that were built for specific residential use, and we're really talking about rental apartment buildings, would not qualify for coverage unless otherwise specifically permitted. But our legislation, the Ontario New Home Warranties Plan Act, is pretty clear that there's an exclusion for rental apartment buildings for these types of projects. So condo conversions benefit from the same 7-year warranty coverage that I described earlier, as with other homes and condominiums, with one exception. The pre-existing elements are not covered by the 1-year warranty in defects in workmanship and material. So if you think about like a masonry wall that's being retained as a feature wall inside a lobby or a unit, or a hardwood floor that's 100+ years old that's being salvaged and retained as the flooring in a unit. These obviously structurally these elements have to function and work, otherwise they wouldn't be retained, or they'd have repairs done to them. But from a workmanship perspective, we can't apply new construction tolerances like gaps in the floor or masonry width joints to these potentially very old components. So that's why that warranty is excluded, but everything else is included. And one of the the key ones is the water penetration warranty for 2 years and the major structural defect warranty. So they still have to, these projects still have to meet those requirements. Okay, so sorry, the other thing I'll note is the Ontario Building Code. That's a really important one too, because there might be variances, or might be part 10 or 11 of the code that are allowing for certain things that part 3, like a modern part 3 building, would not allow for. So there's some specific requirements when it comes to identifying the path to code compliance, what parts of the code are relied on for what parts of the building. So that's something that this process includes. And when it comes to warranty protection beyond the first year, coverage would apply to both the new construction and the pre-existing elements. So really, it's really important that we understand what's being retained and the condition of that. And there's a whole additional approval process that a developer is required to go through. So I guess I would say, if you're involved in a conversion project and you think that Tarion or an HCRA might not be on the builder developer's radar, I'd highly encourage you and request that you flag it with them and just make sure that they're aware that a project like this does in fact have to be covered. And they, in addition to being enrolled with Tarion, this developer would need to be licensed with HCRA. So lots of things to consider for a project like this. This is just additional resources. There's a lot of information here. I think we're going to make this available. We'll send this in a PDF form afterwards, I believe. So you'll have access to some of these links if you want to look at this and get some more information. And then this next section is just some frequent questions. So we thought that before we get into the Q&A section, we'd just address a few things that have come up, not on a regular basis, but kind of more than once. And we could talk about these issues a little bit. I could kind of start into some of these. Sandro, if you have any input, feel free to jump in as well. So the first one here has to do with the Condo Act and Schedule G. We get a lot of questions about Schedule G. I think for a long time, there was some misconceptions that Schedule G was a Tarion document and a requirement of ours. And that's not the case. So Schedule G is in fact a document that is born of the Condo Act, and it's a requirement of the Condo Act. So as much as we, really our only overlap with Schedule G is that Schedule G being completed needs to happen for registration of the condo. And then once the condo is registered, that's when the Tarion warranty or the builder's warranty that Tarion administers comes into effect. But other than that, like the content of Schedule G and what it's asking and its terms is not something that Tarion has really any control of. So I just wanted to clarify that for everybody. Are there different Tarion forms for different size projects? Yeah, we do have, like, within, I guess, in terms of forms, that maybe we're talking about B19 here, and we've got a B19 process for type C's and D's, and that, again, just to remind you, that's projects that include a combination of Part 9 and Part 3. But we also do have B19 reporting for A's and B's. And there are some different requirements, and a lot of times a developer might, like if they are going to do B19 reporting on a low-rise Part 9 building, they'll elect to do it. In a couple, I guess over the last year or so, there's been three projects where we've seen such a unique kind of application of the cladding, configuration, different components, where we've said, for a list of reasons, this project is higher risk than a normal Part 9 building. So we're actually going to impose B19 requirements on a project that we otherwise wouldn't have. And that's something that we're looking into. We're doing a consultation on B19 coming up this year, and we're exploring, should some more formal review play a larger role in Part 9 construction? Because when we look at our claims, even though we don't do B19 work on, we don't have B19 requirements on most Part 9 buildings, we still can experience a lot of issues with Part 9 construction. So just because it's a smaller building doesn't necessarily mean that there's less issues with it. Although our predominant risk has always been, Part 3 high-rise, mid-rise to high-rise and up. So so there are some different forms depending on the size of the project, I guess, is the answer to that. What will Tarion do, excuse me, if a developer converts a new apartment building to a residential condo after construction? What should an architect do if asked to sign off on such a conversion after the fact in the absence of Tarion inspectors? So one thing that happens sometimes is, a developer sets out to build kind of a purpose-built apartment building, and then right at the end might say, actually, instead of making this an apartment building, I'm going to make this a condo. But you're right, in a case like that, there hasn't been any inspection. There hasn't been any of that B19 that we feel is so important. And these are obviously not ideal situations for that reason. So it's really case by case, but if you're involved in one of these, I would highly encourage the developer to reach out to us as soon as you hear anything that suggests that they might change from their purpose-built rental plan to a for sale model. I think if you have a client that is maybe on the fence and not sure if they're going to make an apartment or a condo, it's not a bad idea to do, Tarion requirements and HCRA requirements from the beginning, although sure, there's some extra cost in that, but then they can kind of decide if they want to, if the market changes, they have that additional B19 review. Because one of the things that we're going to ask for is that they get the licensing with HCRA, They do all of the documentation and requirements and security that's required for the qualification for enrollment process with us. And then we're also going to do some retroactive B19. So we're potentially going to have them open things up and validate and still bring in that B19 FRC as a field review consultant to make sure that at the end of the day, these risks have been considered. So it's not kind of a, we want to make sure that the industry knows that it's not like a loophole that they can just call in an apartment and then change it, that there are some real considerations and implications to that. So that's kind of how we look at that one. For a custom home, is the licensed builder required for a custom home where the contractor works for the owner, or only if the home is going to be sold to the first occupants? Does an architect have any responsibility to ensure that a contractor is properly registered with Tarion HCRA? The architect's contract may end with the completion of the working drawings. So I wouldn't say that that any of this really is the architect's responsibility. The architect, even on a custom home, is generally, not the builder, not the vendor. I would say in most cases, not the developer rather. In the situation of a custom home, like we get into, an owner is allowed to build their own home without having warranty coverage. But the question becomes, are they truly building it for themselves, or are they hiring somebody to do this? And where's the line between, who's controlling the project? Is it the owner? Is it this maybe construction manager that the owner hired? So there's a lot of considerations. HCRA also has some requirements on this for defining, the who's doing what on a project, and they're responsible for the definitions of a builder, and they might have some input on that too. So if you're involved in a project like that, again, I would encourage you to reach out to Tarion, reach out to HCRA. It doesn't ever hurt to ask a question, and these are really case-by-case scenarios. So it's hard to give an answer that covers everything here. But again, I think that I would think it rare for an architect to be responsible for any warranty obligations for their design on a contract home. Just the next one here, and then we'll get into, I think, some questions that might have come up from this. At what point after construction occupancy does Tarion cease to be involved in a project? Does an architect doing a renovation repair need to be concerned about Tarion involvement in the project? So really the answer to this is, if we're talking about a condo, 7 years after the date of registration, there's no more ability for the owner, who is the condo corporation, to submit a claim to Tarion. If it did, it would be considered too late. So unless we were already working on something that, a claim that was reported, that's the only time that we didn't be involved in a project beyond 7 years. Same goes for a home as well. So, a single family home, if you're dealing, this question might be tailored more to maybe an extensive repair or renovation in a single family home that's relatively new. But after 7 years, you really don't have to be concerned about that, because there wouldn't be any warranty coverage anymore. And then the last question here in the kind of frequent questions, how does Tarion deal with modular offsite construction and review? This one's pretty new for us, I guess, at least from a condo perspective, because of the recent code changes, I believe in 2022, that kind of opened up modular construction to more than just, Part 9. So we're kind of trying to adapt to this one and figure out how exactly we do this. I don't know if I've got a great answer, but we've got one condo project that's been proposed. I think that's actually under construction right now. That's modular units. It's a Part 9 condo. They're configured in blocks of either 4 or 6 modules in almost like a subdivision layout with streets, and it's laid out. It's in Northern Ontario. In that situation, there's CSA requirements for the actual manufacturing. I know the municipality has some requirements too, with the jurisdiction that's having authority of, we've even heard municipalities talk about, they want the local municipality, wherever these modules are being fabricated, to inspect the the construction as they're being built, and then the local municipality where they're being installed is going to inspect the installation. So on this one, because they're Part 9, there wasn't any requirements to have Tarion do any in-factory review, although that's something that we're considering if it is a larger project that has Part 3 requirements. But on this one, what we did require was an engineer or an architect to be on site during the installation of the modules, and essentially signing off on the reviewing and signing off on the interconnection of the membrane between the modules, because from our review and understanding, that's one of the kind of key failing points with these modules is water getting in between these planes not being properly tied in together, and then once it's in, it can kind of move around. That in addition to just transportation and site storage, moisture management seems to be the big concern with modules. So that's really what we have our focus on. Kind of ran through all those. Sandro, was there any thoughts on any of this before we get into?
No, I think you got it covered all.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Before we get into, I'll pass it over to Andrew for questions. I just wanted to clarify one thing. A question came in, had to do with the lot line and clarification on a lot line condo. So a lot line is essentially where the boundaries of the ownership or where the owner owns to extend beyond the building itself, and typically it would fall somewhere on the property. So they would own the condo units, they would own the envelope, they would own maybe some landscaping as well. So that's what I meant when I talked about a type A lot line condo. For interior, like I'm thinking that these are most commonly maybe like a freehold, or sorry, a common element row houses or townhomes. And so that lot line is going to be at the middle of the party wall for an interior unit, and then might extend to the front yard and backyard of that space as well. But there's no common elements, because that unit owner owns their unit, they own the envelope as well, and maybe a little bit of the landscaping at the front and back. And that's a common application. We also see that in like developments, like a golf course development. Sometimes the entire home and some landscaping is one unit within the larger kind of common elements of that development, unassumed roads, things like that. So hopefully that answers that question. That's how we look at type A lot line condos. And I'll pass things over to Andrew, who I think is going to moderate some additional questions that may have come in.
Yep. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, we've had some other questions come in, so we're going to try and go through all of these fairly quickly. I think some of these have been mostly addressed, or I should say mostly addressed. Some of these have been touched on already by what Ryan and Sandro had spoken to. So please, Ryan, if it maybe just makes sense to do a quick recap so we can try and get through as many of these as possible.
Sure.
So to start off, is there a maximum percentage of units that a developer is limited to buy to avoid the warranty? So I think this speaks to that earlier exclusions and exceptions slide.
To avoid the warranty, no. As long as a developer is building and selling, then they would meet the definition of a vendor builder, and it would, as long as the definitions of the act are met, I guess is what I'm saying, with the vendor builder and a home. There's that sale transaction. There isn't really something that a builder can do. I mean, unless the answer, I guess, is 100%. If the developer's retaining all of it, that means they're not selling it. Then that would be really the only way. But as long as they're selling even one unit, then warranty applies.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Next one sort of touches on a similar thing in terms of warranty coverage, but would multiplexes built to be sold as income rental properties, so not being rented out by the developer directly, be covered? So again, as Ryan indicated, the core component of when a warranty is required is the sale of the new home. So regardless of what the end user ends up doing with that, the builder builds the home and or a vendor sells the home to a third party, that requires warranty coverage.
Just a small caveat on that. So for anything up to 2 units, so if you've got a 2-unit dwelling unit, sorry, a 2-unit dwelling that's been built, that would have coverage. The Act, though, it is limited to the definition of home being a 2 dwelling units. So in theory, if a developer was building something with like a triplex or a quad, or you know, we've even seen some with 5, these multiplexes. As long as it's under, you know, all within one pin or one home structure with these multi-units within them, that may not have warranty coverage. So that's one consideration.
Thanks for the clarification, Ryan. Next question: if a developer has exclusive use of an area designated as a common element by the Condo Corporation, is there warranty coverage for that specific area?
Sorry, if if the developer has exclusive use of it,
yeah,
as long as it's a common element, and this would all be laid out in the description or declaration and description document. As long as the area that we're talking about is a common element owned and responsible by the Condo Corporation, there would be warranty coverage for it.
Thanks, Ryan. Next question in just about whether or not the slide deck will be available. Yes, we will be making it available through the OAA and Felix after the presentation. So you'll be able to get a copy of that. Next question, FRC, are the FRC and B19 consultant the same thing?
Yes, they are. We refer to them both.
There we go. Is an architect required to be involved with Tarion if they are involved in a custom home project and services extend into construction assistance, i.e. their work does not end at the completion of the working drawings?
I don't think so, but again, I guess it depends on what exactly the scope of work is. Like if they're just reviewing to make sure that their design was properly realized and constructed, there isn't really a requirement under the Ontario New Home Warranty Plan Act for any architect's involvement or kind of things that you would need to do specifically. So I think the answer is no on that. Again, think where it might be a little bit different is if you're in any way acting or associated with the constructor or the builder doing anything more than review. I think you maybe might want to reach out and talk with HCRA or maybe even us on a specific basis. But generally, I would say no if you're doing construction review during the course of a contract home design, that shouldn't involve Tarion.
Thanks, Ryan. Next one, do FRCs have the authority to reject defective work? And what is their responsibility for prompt reporting of deficiencies or concern? There's a discrepancy between the architect's field review reporting, which is monthly, and the FRC's occurring 60 days. How would this be resolved?
So FRCs don't have the authority to reject. Where's that question?
Oh, sorry, Sandro, I marked it as answered.
A? Sorry,
yeah, so it's
I'm just looking for it and it just got moved on my screen. So they don't have the authority to reject deficiencies. They document deficiencies and ensure that the deficiencies are corrected through the process. At the end of the, sorry, I'm trying to find.
So I think, yeah, so it's in the, if you open up, it's in the answered column now. But Sandra, I think the core thing is, do the FRCs have the authority to reject defective work?
They don't have the authority. They document a defective work, and that defective work is carried through in the reporting to us. At the end of the day, it's going to be documented on the B19 final report as deficiencies, and then that deficiency will be taken care of through the B19 final report.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to note just quick is that an FRC doesn't even necessarily always have the architect's field review reporting. I mean, we definitely encourage it. We want them to have access to consultant reports so that they can pick up on deficiencies that you're identifying and other consultants are identifying. But it's not always the case that they're on those distribution lists. So I think if you're working on a condo and you're seeing concerns, taking an active role in making sure that you know who the FRC is and that you can get them your field review reports. Because it might be that even though they missed your report in their last 60-day update, they might pick it up in their next 60-day update, and then ultimately in the milestone to identify it to us so that we're aware of the concern as well.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Andrew. Next one, we provide the architect's final review report to the city to confirm the building was completed as per the building permit and in compliance with applicable codes. We seldom receive requests from Tarion to issue compliance reports. Why doesn't Tarion recognize the report issued to the city as set out by OAA guidelines?
That's a great question. And I was in a meeting yesterday with a builder, and I actually asked about the package that goes to the city for final occupancy. And that final letter, the FRCs don't typically see. I don't understand why. We generally are asking for a final clearance letter. I know it's a bit of a duplicate, but at the end of the day, for some reason, the vendors or your clients, who are also the FRC's clients, are not providing that letter to the FRCs, and therefore they're asking for a final clearance letter. But it's hopes, like as Ryan mentioned earlier, we're doing a revamp on B19, and we will be looking at that, because it doesn't make sense that a vendor builder is completing a package for occupancy and all the final letters are in there provided to the municipality. In our minds, it makes sense just to duplicate that document and provide it to our FRCs, so we have the same documentation going to the city at the end of the day.
Thanks, Sandro. I think this one touches on a similar, well, maybe not exactly, but for projects like back-to-back townhouses, which are Part 9 projects that do not require architectural designs by the city, why is it still required that for an architect to sign Tarion documents, including Schedule G, and design certificates?
So if it's strictly a Part 9 complex, we typically wouldn't have B19 reporting. It would have to be designated as Type C, as Ryan had mentioned earlier. Now, voluntarily, builders may choose to do the B19 reporting on the Part 9 project, but in reference to the Schedule G, again, as Ryan said, that document's not a Tarion document. Even if B19 reporting is not required on a condominium unit that is a Part 9, Schedule G would be required to be signed, being that it's a condominium and the declaration would need to be submitted to land registry. So that document, apart from our reporting, would require a signature for the declaration purposes only.
Perfect. Thanks, Sandro. Just a clarification, it sounds like FRCs are similar to PMs and condos. If so, how do they differ?
Oh, FRCs and PMs and condos, if we're talking about project managers, first of all, FRC's role is really for the purpose of risk mitigation for us during construction, right? So if I'm understanding the question correctly, if we're talking about property managers or project managers during construction, they have somewhat of a similar role in administrating parts of that project, but from a review, FRCs are strictly there to carry out reviews for our purposes and risk mitigation. I don't know if there's much more of a difference that I could explain between the two individuals.
No, thanks. I think that's helpful, Sandro. Next question: does Tarion coverage apply to the construction of seasonal use homes, i.e., cottages?
My understanding is not. Seasonal homes, I don't think are covered, are they, Ryan? I haven't had to deal with that in a while.
Yeah, I think it might depend on just how seasonal. Like, are we talking like it's not even insulated? Like it's meeting the definition of seasonal from a building code, or is this just a cottage that's only going to be used by somebody, a few months of the year, even though it could be lived in all year round? So I don't want to say not automatically. I think it really depends on the definitions that we're using and the municipal requirements. So I know that HCRA has an advisory on what homes are covered and what homes are not on their website. So I'd encourage you to look into that, because like what we consider cottages can be covered under warranty, even though, you know, someone's not living in it all year round. But there are some, you know, I know that there's code requirements about true seasonal use, like a non-insulated structure, that might be different. So I would look into that one a little bit more. I don't have an answer one size fits all here.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ryan. I think that's the key here is we would encourage you to refer to the HRA advisory that you know outlines the definition for homes, because yeah, cottage isn't necessarily a defined term in that sense. So the next question, if an FRC conducts a water penetration test on windows in a condo and it fails, what is the proper course of action? For example, what is required from the contractor? Is retesting required on that specific window or more windows in other locations? If the window leak is later, years after the occupancy, who is more prone to claims, the architect, third party, or consultant required by FRC?
So the proper course of action on any window testing is to identify the deficiency, have the manufacturer carry out the repair, have the manufacturer carry out the repair to all the windows in the project and ensure that that defect doesn't carry through the project. And in addition, the FRC is to carry out another window test. And they're to carry out window tests until the test passes. And so any deficiency that needs to be repaired, that deficiency needs to be carried out. And if there's multiple deficiencies, then multiple repairs need to be carried out to the satisfaction of the FRC and generally carried out throughout the building.
Thanks, Sandro. So next question, we have a developer planning for Tarion registration at the schematic design stage. How early can Tarion be engaged in a new build high-rise residential project? Is it as early as the schematic design of the project? And if yes, what documents are required to be submitted? Are there any risks that there might be changes to the design as the project progresses?
So there's all, I'll go ahead, Ryan, you're
gonna. No, yeah, you go ahead.
I was going to say, there's always this question of with the FRCs that we were challenged with, at what stage do the FRCs start reviewing drawings? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the terms that are used when you have different sets of drawings because we haven't been involved with it that often. We often ask the FRCs to get involved in design review. And it's critical for us that they do, because I think the important part is when details are set in place or when details are provided, so that the FRCs can review the drawings with the details and then provide their recommendations and hopefully be able to provide those recommendations to yourselves as architects and to your client, the vendor builder, so that the appropriate action can be taken prior to a set of construction drawings being submitted. And those areas, you know, will eventually be changed or maybe not. And hopefully we'll have less risk on the site. And that's really the intent, is for that FRC to provide feedback to help assist in the risk mitigation.
If I can just add,
yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. I think the question also was about when to come to Tarion, like how early. And there's, I would have a pretty solid understanding of like the height and the amount of units and things like that. But beyond that, like if the building is kind of moving and the floor plates are still being designed, we don't necessarily need that level of detail. And it's okay. And we acknowledge that plans do change. We would just maybe ask for updates. And, you know, if there was any key risks that change, we might have to reassess some things. But it's always a good idea to plan these things earlier on than later, so that, you know, we're not scrambling and your clients aren't scrambling and late for their sales targets. So they can, the other thing too that we can do is we have a program right now with HCRA where we're kind of both running concurrently. So HCRA is doing their review, Tarion's doing our review. And then obviously we can't do anything until the licensing is finalized, but it just makes that process faster for developers. So yeah, I would encourage them to start that application if they know that they're going to be selling. I don't think there's a too early stage. So.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Sandro. Next question: is there Tarion involvement in on apartment building projects at all? And if not, why is it not required for apartments?
Yeah, so if we're talking a strictly purpose-built rental apartment building, it is not required. There would be, an owner in that sense if it, a developer's having an apartment building built for themselves or maybe for somebody else. But the units are not covered. It's not contemplated in our act. Remember, like Tarion's purpose is consumer protection for the purchases of new homes. So apartments, as much as there's a tenant in those apartments that would benefit from the things that we're making sure that these projects get built properly, it's just not a requirement and not part of our legislation.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. Does Tarion cover grading issues?
We do with we look at condo and freehold, like low-rise homes, differently. We'll talk about condo. I mean, essentially it has to meet the grading plan. It has to meet the design. Whether we're talking about paved landscape surfaces, there's a landscape architect who's involved as well, and there's civil in terms of moving water on the sites and utilities that are looked into. So there is warranty for all of that. On the home side, it's really the perimeter of the home. We want to make sure the water is not coming back to the house or the structure. Beyond that, like the actual lot itself on a freehold home or contract home or whatever it might be, warranty is limited. Really, it is around the perimeter of the house only.
Thanks, Ryan. Next question. How does it work if the custom home is a design build by the architect? So I don't know if you want to speak to that quickly, Ryan. I think that's...
Design build by the architects. Yeah, I don't know if I could really speak to that quickly. I think if you have questions, if you're in that scenario, feel free to reach out to me, and I can kind of get you in touch with somebody who can get you some more information. Just in the interest of time, there's a couple other issues here that I think we might want to focus on, and not so much the single family home.
Yep.
We can look at it, if this is a popular topic, we could look at we've got another department that deals with freehold home and low rise. We could always set up one of those sessions similar to this.
So the next one, besides Schedule G, what are the major issues Tarion is finding with conflicts with architects' responsibilities? Perhaps, for example, an insurance claim. I don't know if you can speak to, I guess, more broadly in terms of if there are any issues or best practices we could recommend.
Off the top of my head, I don't have any right now, Ryan, unless you can think of anything.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's in conflict with the architect's responsibilities, but I can say, and I mentioned that before about the water penetration being our number one. And if we're talking about kind of insurance claims, and I know, Prodemnity gets involved with those sorts of things. The one thing that I'll note is that we have a very high amount of water ingress claims, and it's always our number one issue with condos. We haven't looked at this specifically, but it's very likely our number one cost too when we're paying out claims. To the extent that we're looking into things like building envelope review and how that works, and how the architectural review during construction overlaps with that. So these are some of the big things, and we actually went back and looked at all of our warranted items over the past 5 years. We did this a couple of years ago, and it showed that water penetration, through the building envelope was just about number one. Mechanical was the other one. I know that's not exactly with you folks, but the mechanical issues is probably our number two. So there's some things that we're looking into there, but yeah, probably too much to get into in great detail right now.
Thanks, Ryan. I think we got maybe time for one more, and we'll make it a bit of a double header. What are the qualifications for an FRC? For example, could an architect be an FRC?
Yes, an architect can be an FRC, and generally our FRCs are engineers or architects. We look highly on the building sciences background of the firm or individuals, and the qualifications for more detail are outlined in the bulletin 19, which is on our site.
Yeah, there's another small caveat to that. An architect can be an FRC, but they can't operate as both within the the confines of one single project. So if you're the architect on this project, you also can't be the FRC. If you're the FRC on another project, you can't have acted as the architect. So just because it's a conflict of interest potentially.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ryan. That's a very good point. Okay, so we'll just squeeze one last one in. How is the window wall performing as a product? There are numerous cautions from the architect's prodemity.
Yeah, window wall endorsement is probably not something that we can squeeze in a short time frame like this. I don't know if we've got time to get into details on window wall performance or issues that we're seeing with window wall.
Okay. No, that's fair. And then just one final one, just because it's a bit of an easy one. What does the word Tarion mean? There is no meaning. It was just simply made up. I don't know, Ryan or Sandro, if you know any of the background on that, but yeah, there's no specific meaning to it. It's just a name for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that it's just a bit of a play on Ontario, right? It's just shuffling some of those letters around. So I think that's the extent of its creativity or origins.
Oh, perfect. So yeah, so we're a minute over. I don't know. We've tried to answer all of the questions. And again, there's maybe some more information. Another session we can look to partner with the OAA on and provide at a future date. But I just want to say thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Sandro, for providing all that information, and thank you all on the line for joining. I know we've had quite a few people join us today, and I'm just really thankful for the partnership and to be able to pass along this information to you architects out in the field. Felix, I'll turn it back over to you then.
Perfect, Andrew, Ryan, Sandro, and thank you very much for a great webinar today. As we conclude this webinar, I would like to draw your attention to several important announcements. Our next webinar is scheduled for next week, February the 29th, also at 11 a.m. and the title, Healthy Interior Design, Lessons Learned from a Pandemic. The OAA will report your participation in this webinar to your OAA transcript. Therefore, there is no need for individual reporting on your part. We kindly ask for your patience as we process and confirm the accreditation of your hours within the next few weeks. Additionally, all attendees will soon receive the presentation file via email, along with a link to submit your feedback. Once again, thank you very much for your attendance and have a productive and pleasant remainder of your day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.